Hello, everybody. It's the 7th week of the fall 2018 semester, so we're approaching that halfway point now. I know that I've not completely graded the essays from last week yet, and I tried to keep up on the quizzes, but I will probably have all that done by about midweek. So I'll have 2 weeks worth of essays that I need to grade this week, but I will try and get those done as quickly as I can. Just know that if you've been doing well on your essays and you've not changed anything, you'll probably continue doing well. On the flip side of that, if you've been struggling, I hope you've been reading my comments, because I have been trying to help you with all the comments that I give you. If you've not been reading my comments and you're doing the same old thing, well, you can probably expect your grades to be lower. These comments will start to peter out until eventually, towards the end of the semester, I'll just start giving numbers rather than full explanations. And then, of course, those that care about why they got the grade they got will be free to email me, at which point I will then say, okay, this is why you got the grade you got. So anyway, it's not that I'm going to be a closed book. It's just that I don't like to make the same comments over and over again and see the same mistakes in essays over and over again. All right, so this week is an extremely important week in the history of Britain and really the history of the world, because this week we're going to look at the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution completely altered our lifestyles. There's been some good that's come out of it, right? Your cell phones, whether they're Android or iPhones or whatever brand they are, would not exist without an Industrial Revolution. Automobiles would not exist without an Industrial Revolution. In fact, mass transit would not exist. These super retail stores would not exist without an Industrial Revolution. So our lifestyles have improved because of some of the advances of industrialization. However, there's a flip side to that, and it's a very dark flip side. And that is that capitalism unchecked can result in very harmful effects on people, particularly the working class. And that is a debate that is still fiercely debated today, right? Do we pay a livable wage or don't we pay a livable wage? Do we make sure the workers are safe at work, or do we sacrifice workplace safety to save a little money? And this is a debate that's been going on for about coming up on 200 years now. So the Industrial Revolution was a perfect storm. There were a lot of things that happened, particularly in England, that made the Industrial Revolution possible. So read that Introduction to Industrialism, Blessing or Curse, and look through that slideshow, because it goes into great detail about it. And what you're going to read this week, we're going to focus on the Brownings. Now, Robert Browning was a celebrity during his lifetime. He became a big star. We still read some of his stuff, particularly his things called dramatic monologues, which is what you're reading from him for this week which is My Last Duchess. And what a dramatic monologue does is it actually gives you one side of a conversation without you hearing what this person's responding to. So it's going to take a little work to get through My Last Duchess, because you have to anticipate, why is our narrator saying this? Well, what did the other person that he's speaking to say to him to make him respond this way? And so that's a story based on a true story about a duke and a duchess in what would eventually become Italy, where it's suspected that he may have murdered his first wife. And her painting hangs on a wall in an art gallery that he has. In fact, he's a big-time art collector. And he's going through negotiation with something called a marriage broker. So at a time when marriage was not based on love, but rather it was based on economic gain, or keeping status or keeping titles, a lot of times brokers would come in and say, okay, here are the available wives. I can make a deal with them. The father of the bride would often pay a dowry to the husband that's going to take the daughter off his hands, and the dowry will be discussed a little bit in My Last Duchess. But notice how this duke that's doing the speaking is very arrogant. He's got a 900-year-old name, and he thinks that this duchess should be honored to have that 900-year-old name. He also has some jealousy issues. In fact, one of the reasons why he may or may not have killed his first wife had to do with jealousy and the fact that, she appreciated gifts that all the people gave her, not just the gifts that he gave her. So these are things to look at. The fact that he's an art collector, the fact that he's jealous, the fact that he may or may not have killed his first wife, the fact that they are discussing what kind of a deal, particularly a dowry, is coming in order to make this marriage happen. And of course, the Duke is going to be very clear about, I am the boss. She's going to do what I say. All right. The other part has to do with the Industrial Revolution. And this is what your posting is going to be, right? I don't have a posting question on My Last Duchess, but you do have to read it and do well on the quiz. We're going to look at how art and serious writing can both be effective in bringing about social change. You may ask the question, why are you making us read poetry, Mr. Smith? Poetry and art can often have a positive social impact and can bring about positive changes. Think about the music of today. Think about the movies of today. Think about the documentary films of today. Think about all of the ways that art is comments on social change and can at times make a difference. Cry of the Children by Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a poem that did just that when it comes to something called child labor. So the first thing you probably should read is the report by the Commissioner of Mines on child labor. They're going to have an interview with a young girl named Peggy who is subjected to the abuses of working in a coal mine. Horrific working conditions. You will be stunned at what you read. They were so bad. And then that report got into the hands of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was a celebrity at the time. In fact, she was a celebrity before her husband was. Robert Browning was a fan of Elizabeth Barrett and met her and eventually was able to woo her. And if you've known Elizabeth Barrett Browning from before, it was probably because of her poem Sonnet 43 from Sonnets of Portuguese, which starts off, "How do I love thee, let me count the ways." And you can read that. It's in the book. It's not a sign, but at least you can say you've read Sonnet 43. So she used her celebrity to write this poem, Cry of the Children. And people read it because nobody's going to read a government report. That's just not something people do. But people will read the poetry of their favorite poet, just like they'll listen to the music of their favorite musician, just like they'll watch the films of their favorite directors and actors, and so on and so forth. They read her poem, and people were shocked at how bad the children had it that were working in mines and working in factories. And they were so horrified that this was the beginning of some legislation that would outlaw putting children under, say, 8 years old to work, which, is not great progress, but it's still progress because kids are being put to work as early as 5 years old. And pay attention to some of the ways in which people might have been shocked. For example, children had lost their faith in God because they kept praying, "Please, God, deliver us from this life." And they weren't being delivered. They were still having to go to work every day and be subject to the physical and verbal abuse of the supervisors. And yes, there was physical abuse going on. In fact, Peggy will tell you all about that in the mine report. Also, there's a part in there where Alice has died, and the children think she's the lucky one. How is it possible that a girl dies and the children say, "I wish I was her," instead of going to work? That's how bad the working conditions were that they were subject to. And there are many more atrocities that children were subject to because of child labor in the Industrial Revolution that you're going to have to pay attention to in this reading. So this week you're going to look at how both the report from the government and the Elizabeth Barrett Browning poem worked in conjunction with each other to start the ball rolling on some positive change. And I will make the statement that, yes, we live a much better life now because people work in factories and manufacture our goods for us and things like that. But the downside, and this is stuff that's still going on, are things like environmental pollution, or things like child labor, maybe not so much in the United States, but in other countries, low wages, unsafe working conditions, and so on and so forth. This is still relevant today, just like it was when the Industrial Revolution started, because anybody that thinks we can't go back to that needs to rethink it. So that's this week. Again, I promise you by about midweek I'll start looking at last week's essays and or the last 2 weeks' essays and grade any quizzes I'm not caught up on, and then I'll be able to submit your midterm grades whenever that comes due, which is I don't remember what week it is exactly, but we're not terribly far away from your midterm grades. So that's it. Have a great week, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.